Interruption, but I'm Mike Wilbon. It's National Philanthropy Day, and here's our gift to you.
You're welcome, America.
Fill in Frank!
There they go.
Frank!
I'm back, baby.
What do you mean? You bring your own little chorus now?
Yep, and I got the glasses, the whole thing.
The FBI glasses. You look like you could be on some corner on K Street and around 16th.
Just the facts, Mike. Just the facts.
Just the facts. Okay. Welcome to PTI. Kornheiser almost went the distance, but coming out of the pen to save him today is our great friend from The Athletic, Mr. Frank Isola.
Oh, unbelievable. The love. Probably because you guys are gone. That's why.
We begin where everybody in America is today with Myles Garrett's suspension for clocking Mason Rudolph with the quarterback's own helmet and the controversy that act ignited. The NFL has suspended Garrett for the rest of this season and perhaps beyond for what happened at the end of Steelers-Browns last night. Marquise Pouncey was suspended 3 games for going to his quarterback's defense, and Browns defensive tackle Larry Ogunjobi was given a game for his part. Curiously, Rudolph wasn't given anything, even though he was the original instigator. Frank, does all that feel right to you?
You know what? I don't have a problem with what the NFL did. You want to give Mason Rudolph a fine, that's okay. You call him the instigator. I think everything was all right, even to the point where Myles Garrett took Rudolph by the face mask and lifted him up. Once he took the helmet off, if everything had stopped, everything would have been fine. You cannot be using the helmet like that. That's a helmet-to-head violent act, and it's going to cost Myles Garrett. Who knows? It could cost him into next season. But I think the NFL in this case did the right thing because that was an ugly way to end a nationally televised game.
I'm going to take the small part first, and I'll work back. Not giving Rudolph a game? What are they doing? The NFL's always tone deaf and incapable, it seems, of getting everything right. They just can't do it. I mean, you wonder sometimes if they just say, let's just mess with everybody and do something stupid. And in this case, omit a suspension to Rudolph, who one game, he tried to pull a guy's helmet off. There's a rule against that.
At the bottom of the pile, though. He's at the bottom of the pile.
It was just the two of them. It was just the two of them at the time. It's stupid. Now, and by the way, it opens the door to all kinds of questions that we're going to get to, I promise you, down the road. Maybe even, at the end of the weekend. But the big picture, Myles Garrett had to go. This is an easy suspension, a hard thing to see, but an easy suspension. They said indefinite. I guess they're going to try to say we want to give him some chance before we put him back out there to convince us he's worthy of it. I was struck, Frank, last night by the unanimity of players and former players around the NFL, starting with the first person I saw, Keyshawn Johnson, on our airways, I guess on SportsCenter, who said, no, he's got to go away for a long time. There wasn't anybody making an excuse or having Myles Garrett's back. That struck me, and it made it easier for the NFL to act decisively.
There are violent acts all the time in football. This one crossed the line. But remember this, too, about Myles Garrett. Already this season, fined $52,000 for punching one player. The 2 late hits on Trevor Siemian of the Jets, one of them cost him his season. So, he's been a repeat offender, Michael. That factors into it as well, don't you think?
Yeah, Frank. People say, he's never been involved in anything.
Yeah.
And, that's not exactly. And people need to also stop saying there's never been anything like this in NFL history. Stop.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Because all you got to do is go back to the 30s and 40s when there were unbelievably violent acts. I guess the helmet might have been leather and not whatever it is at the time. But there were unbelievably violent acts in the NFL. So let's stop with that. What Garrett did stands on its own under the category of stupid.
All right, Michael, lost in all the Myles Garrett madness was the Cleveland Browns accomplishing something they've done just 3 times over the previous 4 seasons. They won consecutive games. How about that? Cleveland is now 4-6 and very much alive for a playoff berth, but Baker Mayfield admitted that Thursday's win over division rival, quote, feels like we lost. Michael, what does this result do for the Browns and the Steelers?
It didn't do anything for the Browns. I mean, let's stop with the Browns. Once every 15 years or so, somebody runs the table. It's as dumb as the assertion every week in college football. But if they all run the table, I mean, stop. The Cleveland Browns aren't any good. The Pittsburgh Steelers weren't any good for several weeks. The Browns sort of did lift themselves up until that last episode, and they got to win at home over a rival they ought to beat. They were 0-7-1. Their jobs were on the line.
Yep.
Every time they lose to the Steelers in this context, their coach gets fired in Cleveland, so they needed to win the game. Does it mean they're going to suddenly turn their season around and start beating everybody? Hell no.
And remember, it's a costly loss for Pittsburgh. Juju Smith-Schuster, concussion. James Conner, both those players got hurt in the game. Pittsburgh's 5-5. They got the Bengals and the Browns coming up, so they're still very much alive. What kills me about the Browns is that here's a season where they should be better than Pittsburgh. How is Pittsburgh ahead of them after everything that Pittsburgh has lost, including their starting quarterback?
Discipline and coaching would be part of the answer.
And that's the point. They lead the NFL in penalties. They got 50 more penalties than the second closest team. And if you go back to week 1, 18 penalties. So what we learned last night is what we've known about the Browns. They're an undisciplined team. And Freddie Kitchens, that's going to fall on you.
It is. They lead the league in dumb.
Yep.
When you look at the kinds of penalties they have, and we're talking about week after week after week, and I don't know that I want to connect them to sort of a rogue act by Myles Garrett, but what we do know is there's a tolerance for stupid in that Cleveland football culture, and so who knows where it sort of leaks out. But no, Pittsburgh's got a shot. First of all, they absolutely had better be 7-5. I expect them to dismantle the Browns in 2 weeks after they take care of the Bengals.
A couple of things from the Browns, though. Nick Chubb, 92 yards is important. And Baker Mayfield, who, by the way, handled himself very well after the game. No interceptions, but they got to start getting that offense going. The offense just hasn't been good enough, and they got to get Odell Beckham involved at some point. He's just too talented, not involved enough in the offense.
The return of Carmelo Anthony to the NBA isn't as dramatic as the return of Colin Kaepernick would be to the NFL, but the 10-time All-Star and 4-time Olympian hasn't played in the league in a year. And it did raise some eyebrows when it was reported that Melo will sign with the Trail Blazers. Portland unquestionably is in need of a forward who can score, and preferably do so by stretching the defense. Frank, he's one of your faves, I know that. What kind of player does he need to be in Portland to make this move work?
Yeah, it's going to be tough, Michael. The last time Carmelo Anthony played an NBA game was November 8th. You don't get better by not playing. I don't care how many videos he sends out of the workouts that he's doing. That doesn't matter. He has not played an NBA game in over a year. But Portland is in need. Zach Collins is hurt, done for the season. They made a couple of trades. They need forwards. Right now, their forwards score about 36 a game. That's 27th in the league. It's a guard-dominant team with C.J. McCollum, obviously Damian Lillard, but Portland is struggling. They're in a place right now. Michael, they're 1-4 at home. This is a team that was in the conference finals last year. I think they're desperate. They need Carmelo to come off the bench and give them some kind of scoring.
Yeah, you can't count the Warriors because of the injuries, and so therefore Portland's probably been the disappointment in the West so far. And it's early. I like this move for a lot of reasons, Frank. One, it's early, and they made the move. They're not in denial. They're saying, okay, we got a problem here. You specified what that problem is. Our friend Charles Barkley had said sometime about a week or so ago that he thought Kevin Love would be a great fit.
Yeah.
Kevin Love is from Oregon,
right.
But they'd have to give up something to get something of value to get Kevin Love. Carmelo brings a lot of that same stuff, okay? I know. The question is what percentage? What are we talking about from Carmelo now? Can he give them 14, 15 points, somewhere between 12 and 15 points a game?
Gotta got to defend as well.
Do it with the jump shooting that we had seen a couple of years ago? Or is it going to be he still has to just play without the ball while the guards have it in their hands and he can't find his rhythm? I'm wondering.
A couple of months ago, I saw him up at the Hall of Fame. He was receiving a community service award. He looks great. He's in great shape, probably the best shape he's been in a long time. But he's been humbled as well. And Carmelo wanted this opportunity. He wanted one more chance. So Carmelo is going to do everything he can. I'm just worried about him also on the defensive end. That's I
want this to work, Frank. I'd love to see it be a great story.
Absolutely. Well, if Carmelo is still with Portland on New Year's Day, he'll receive a warm greeting when the Blazers visit Madison Square Garden. Warm and fuzzy, however, isn't how Kristaps Porzingis felt Thursday when he returned to MSG for the first time since last January's infamous trade. The scene, Michael, was rather hostile and nasty. So, Michael, were Knicks fans, they were out for blood last night from start to finish. Do you feel like they were a little too tough on Kristaps Porzingis?
I don't know. Knicks fans, please. They are so impressed with themselves and they're savvy.
It's the Mecca, Michael.
They haven't witnessed any good home basketball for like 30 years, but just keep telling everybody how smart and great you are as fans. You know what they're doing? They're screaming at Porzingis while they have their camera phones taking pictures of him. To do what? It's also phony. It's just, I mean, it was just, I'm sick of them. I didn't know which way their act was going to go last night. Did they all text each other and say boo before the game like a college situation? I wish Porzingis had just torch them, and maybe he will in the future. But my obsession with them being tired of Knicks fans dominates my sentiment about this story.
Well, Michael, they were chanting traitor and things like that. And a friend of this program, Brian Windhorst, had written a story that before the trade was made, the Knicks were talking to the Dallas Mavericks about the framework for a Porzingis trade. They basically had alienated Kristaps Porzingis. They didn't want him. And then when they called him in for that meeting, they said to him, "You really don't want to be here anymore, do you?" And he said, "No, not really." They spun the story. He doesn't want to be here. He left us, and the fans are buying it. Yet you want to blame Kristaps Porzingis for the last 20 years at Madison Square Garden? Go right ahead, because when he skipped that meeting with Phil Jackson,
my point.
His big thing was, I don't like the direction of this franchise. Guess what? He was on to something. So boo him all you want. I always say, you want to cheer, you want to boo, go right ahead. But it was misguided last night.
That was a concerted effort, and it was just lame and self-absorbed. It make it easier for me to root against the Knicks.
Give the Knicks credit, though, and David Fizdale. They actually played very well.
They did a good job last night doing that. Let's take a break, but coming up, could Auburn bump Georgia from the playoffs tomorrow? We'll ask Marcus Spears.
We'll also ask him what would happen if his team, LSU and Alabama, were to meet up again.
One more time. We've got another intriguing weekend of college football ahead, and to help us analyze it is our friend from the SEC Network, ESPN football analyst Marcus Spears. Now, this purple I'm wearing is for Northwestern, not LSU. But it could have been just for having Marcus on the show. We appreciate you. Listen, before we get started with our college football conversation, you played 9 seasons as a defensive lineman in the NFL. What did you make of the Myles Garrett and Mason Rudolph situation last night?
Mike, thanks for having me, first of all. Man, it was tough because, at one hand, how heated and emotional guys get during the course of a football game, and then you break away from the game. I think anytime we have to have a conversation of things involving something beyond the game, it's bad, especially in that instance. And the fact that Myles Garrett took that helmet and swung at Mason Rudolph like that, it kind of pushed everything that transpired outside of that into a corner, even though that was bad as well. And we focused on that because that is beyond the football field. That's the situation where Mason Rudolph could have been put to sleep. He could have been in a coma. I mean, it's just like if we in a bar and we having a fist fight and somebody pulls out a hammer and hits you across the head, the whole conversation changes at that point. It's no longer just a fight. Now we've entered into court. We've entered into a guy possibly talking about attempted murder, assault, and all of those things. And anytime that's attached to the game of football, especially within the parameters of a game, we in a very dark place, man.
Well, listen, we'll move into a better place now and talk about college football. We'll start with the reason that you're where you are now, LSU Ole Miss. We saw how amped you were by LSU's win over Alabama. What would you, Marcus, tell your team this week to make sure they were grounded again and ready to play a new opponent?
Absolutely. Handle success, right? I think when you measure coaches, when you talk about the great ones, they always keep an even keel, but it's at a championship level. And I think for Ed Orgeron, this will be his greatest swan song right here. Like, how did LSU respond after they got something done that hadn't been done in 8 years? How will this team react? And then from a football standpoint, Mike, when you think about how they start, right, are they still hungover from last week win against Alabama? I don't think this team is. Ed O has a clear message to this team. Every week be 1-0. And I'm sure the players who I have contact with and I'll talk to a lot of times throughout the week, they understand what's in front of them. And then the guy that's leading them in Joe Burrow he's almost playing with a vengeance. to put everybody on notice. Not like this is who we really are. This is not a facade. This is not something that I'll be a one-hit wonder in. This team is in a position right now where they want to show everybody that this is who they are for the remainder of the season. And the goal was to win a national championship, not just to beat Alabama.
All right, Marcus, number 4, Georgia at number 12, Auburn. A couple of years ago, Georgia's the top-ranked team in the country. They go into Auburn. They lose to a 2-loss Tiger team. How does this one set up for Georgia?
Listen, Georgia has to be very, very careful in this football game. Auburn is a 2-loss team, but they could absolutely make an argument to be a top 10 team by the way that they play. They have a young quarterback who's still getting his feet wet, trying to learn. If they had a better offense, we would be having a conversation about Auburn, quite frankly, being in the top 6 with an opportunity to be in the playoffs. So Georgia has to be very careful of that. And it's good on good. Like, I'm a big physical guy. I play D-line. I love to see big offensive linemen go against big defensive linemen. And right now, these are the 2 highest rated fronts in college football that gets to square off. Georgia has to be very leery of making sure that they respect Auburn. People need to remember, Alabama gave up 46 points to LSU. Auburn gave up 23. Just let that sink in for a second. So this is not a team that Georgia is about to play that doesn't understand not only big games, but know that they can compete against the so-called top teams in the country.
All right, we'll look outside the SEC for a second and get to number 10 Oklahoma and number 13 Baylor. Marcus, are you a believer in Baylor? They're still undefeated, and they're going to be undefeated after this game.
Mike, no, and I hate to say it because you have to respect when teams are undefeated. But I liken this to Wisconsin a couple years ago. You guys remember when Wisconsin was undefeated? Yep. They were playing well, and they got to that one game where we all assumed the tide would turn, and it did. So I guess Baylor right now is just on watch for the entire season. Everybody expects Oklahoma to go take care of business. Didn't foresee them losing to Kansas State. But right now, Baylor being undefeated, I think it's a little bit of fool's gold for everybody out there in the college landscape.
You know, maybe you haven't heard this, but Wilbon is a Northwestern man. But he's also a Minnesota guy. How sure are we that the Gophers are going to beat number 20 Iowa this weekend?
Sorry, Mike, not very sure. and look, the performance they put together against Penn State was great. I believe in their coach. I don't think this is a fluke. I just don't think if they can keep that level of play throughout the duration of the season. And already Minnesota has had some struggles winning some close games earlier this season, so it gives you pause. It's like almost this degree of separation in college football where we see what dominant teams look like, and then we see undefeated teams and we say to ourselves, maybe they are just a byproduct of who they played, or they hit a little string of luck. The Penn State game was a huge win for me. I give them respect for that. But in order to be in this conversation long haul, can you continue to do that? We'll see if Lake and the boys can.
Marcus, thank you. Thank you for joining us. By the way, I got Iowa beating Minnesota tomorrow. I'm just saying.
I want the Gophers
to win. It's my conference. I got to pay attention to this conference. SEC Nation from Oxford, Mississippi airs at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning on the SEC Network. Let's take one last break, but still to come. Tom Brady is reportedly aiming to play even beyond 45.
And Trae Young provides even more evidence that Wilbon was wrong about him. Admit it, you were wrong.
I say it every day. This is not new. Every day.
And he loves this show. He talks about you all the time. Be nice to the guy.
Then he should know I got a big plate of crow in front of me when it comes to Trae.